Okay, this is video 1, and I'm going to try to go over what you guys need to do during week 2 pretty briefly, and then go over a couple things in more detail, right? So for every single day, every single week, basically, you're going to have this kind of format where we'll have 3 folders, and it'll tell you what's due um, for those specific days, and all of those things should be linked on the interior of the folders, right? So tomorrow, I want you guys to take a look at Google Sites, Wix, and Weebly, and again, those are linked in the folder. You can also take a look at some other website creation platforms if you want to, if you have other platforms that you're used to, right? Like I've used Squarespace before, um, and that's something like if you're already paying for it that you could potentially use. I'd really, really prefer if you guys use free options, and that's why I have Google Sites, Wix, and Weebly on here, as I know that they all have free options, and my students have used them pretty successfully for a couple semesters now. Also on Monday, read the portfolio handout. We're going to go over that here in a moment. Watch video A and video B. This is video A, so look for video B. Explore the sample portfolios, which are linked inside. And before midnight, submit a 250-word discussion board post explaining which website platform you want to use and why. Right, and in that explanation, right, you can include things you don't like about the one that you choose, or you can just, like, let's say you look at Google Sites, Wix, and Weebly, you can talk about all 3 of them in that post and say, I chose Weebly, but honestly, I don't like this, this, and this about it, but I'm going to use it anyway, and this is why. Right, you don't have to fall in love with any of them. So Wednesday, you're going to create the first page that's going to be part of your website. For now, it doesn't have to be fancy, right? You just have to have one page on your website that has your name and the class name, right? And then you're going to submit the URL to me through course messages before midnight, right? And this is just a way to make sure that people are actually moving forward with getting their portfolio started. And again, I'll talk more about the portfolio here in a moment, but basically you're going to create a class portfolio instead of handing it in as a document or a folder or whatever. It's going to be hosted online. And so as the semester goes on, we're going to keep touching base with the portfolio over and over again. And when you do your major writing assignments, those are going to be submitted as part of your ongoing portfolio project. And then Friday, you're going to take a look at the genre analysis handout. And I go over this in more detail in video B, so take a look at that, especially on Friday. And you're going to do your reading for chapter 1 of Writing Today. And if you have trouble getting into the program, let me know as soon as possible so we can figure out what the problem is. And also the program will track when and if you did the reading. So all of that gets reported to me. So if you have trouble, let me know. Don't skip the reading. Try to get it done on time. And then before midnight, you're going to respond to 2 classmates. And we're going to use the exact same sort of like pattern that we used this last week. So again, you'll go back in, you'll find your post from Monday, and then you'll post like a 50-word response to the person who posted before you, and a 50-word response to the person who posted after you. And that way everybody gets 2 responses, basically. All right, so let's go on here. And you'll see, right, here's video B. Video A will be in there by the time you guys see this. Here's the link to the discussion boards, right? Here's your portfolio handout. We're going to look at that in a moment. Here's the project 1 handout, and that is discussed in video B. Here are links to Wix, Weebly, and Google Sites. And here is an example portfolio template. That's a really good one. And 2 student samples that you should also take a look at, right? And none of these things are exactly what you have to do. I really like to see you guys kind of personalize your projects as much as possible, but it's good to look at examples and see what's working and what's not working, and to give you an idea of what something like this can ultimately look like. So, and I'm sorry I have the sniffles a little bit right now. Okay, so great. Okay, so here is the portfolio assignment prompt. It's going to be due May 14th, but we're going to be working on it throughout the semester. One thing that I want to note, and I want to note it right now, is that do not use Google Docs. Okay. Every semester I have a bunch of students trying to submit stuff to me through Google Docs, and then the permissions are messed up, and then I can't access their papers. And you know, when that's happening with your portfolio at the very end of the semester, a lot of the time somebody will submit a portfolio that I can't even read because I can't access anything through Google Docs, and then they get a bad grade because I can't get a hold of them because they've left town or whatever. So um, I'm just making a rule here. No Google Docs, right? No Google Docs. Just don't do it. I will give you a 0 if you submit it in Google Docs, and you'll have to resubmit it in a different format. And furthermore, Google Docs doesn't really um, it doesn't lend to a really professional and polished look with your portfolios and your website. Um, it 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 just looks like something that's doesn't belong in the middle of the page, right? And I want these to look as much like a regular website as possible. So let's just not use Google Docs. Where are we going? Yeah, so let's go over the tasks with this, right? We have student learning outcomes, and we're going to talk about the SLOs, right? That's short for student learning outcomes. We're going to talk about those a lot as we go on. And part of what you're doing with your portfolio, though, is creating a section in your portfolio that talks about your engagement with the student learning outcomes. So, like this is a really good example of how to think about how to write about the SLOs. And it says, here's what I have learned this semester for this particular SLO, right? So for each of the SLOs, right, you're going to use your own experience as evidence, right? And you can use examples from your texts, uh, from like peer reviews, from my comments to you, any of that stuff, right? And you'll say like, I learned about writing as a process when I did the peer review for project 2. And here's a comment from my peer that I learned a lot from. And you can take a screenshot of that or whatever and include it as part of the evidence for you having engaged with, right, writing as a process or writing as a social act, right? Um, and we're going to talk about this a lot. And if you look at the examples, you'll see some of how people have been doing this. You're going to revise your reflection. So every time you have a major writing assignment, you will write a reflection afterwards. And that reflection should talk about how you've engaged with a couple of the SLOs for that project, and should also kind of just like talk about your experience with the project, right? So at the end of the semester, when you're finalizing your portfolio, what you'll basically do is revise some of your reflections, clean them up a little bit, and then add them to your portfolio alongside your major projects, right? And again, I'll show you that in video B, and also we'll be talking about it as the semester goes on. You'll also repurpose one of your major writing assignments. So you'll take like your first essay or your second essay, and you are going to basically change something about the rhetorical situation. And most of my students will turn it into a different type of document. So they'll take, you know, an essay on pollution and they'll turn it into a brochure, they'll turn it into a YouTube video, they'll turn it into a song or a poem or a painting or whatever, and basically change the medium, right? There are other things you can do with this as well. There's a whole lot of, you can write a whole different type of essay for a different audience or using a different angle, stuff like that. But basically you're going to change one of your previous essays into a new type of document, right? And that's going to be project 3. So your goal with this section of your portfolio is to actually show the process of changing your major writing assignment into a new project, right? And so you'd include your major writing assignment in this section of your portfolio. You'll include your finished project 3 and then any other materials necessary to illustrate your experience with that process. So a lot of students will include, especially if they do art, they'll include like the drafting process of that art. They'll include images that were similar, that they were kind of like using to imitate. If they're doing songs, they'll include, you know, similar songs they were using or all kinds of stuff, right? So basically that'll be that section of your portfolio. You'll have a home page for your portfolio. On that page, you should tell your instructor a little bit about yourself and what you learned over the semester, right? And hopefully kind of say like how the class or how what you learned in the class is going to help you with your career path or where you're wanting to go. And then definitely make sure your portfolio is a true representation of multimodality, right? So that means it should not just be words, right? It should be, it should look like a very engaging website, right? So that means pictures, videos, links, right? It says graphs, charts, songs, anything that you would see on another website is the kind of stuff I want to see on your website, right? And it doesn't have to be super professional or, um, you know, like stoic. Like I've had students make really, really fun, uh, interesting, even like sometimes like comical websites. And so just like think very broadly about what you want to do here and what you think will keep your attention throughout the semester. Here's some different helpful hints for the portfolio, and we'll go over those probably when we get a little bit closer to finalizing that. And then here's the SLOs, right? So these are the student learning outcomes that we're going to be writing about in your reflections, and that when you finish your portfolio, you'll have a whole section on the SLOs specifically with little tidbits from your experience of the class overall to sort of use as evidence, saying like, oh, okay, I learned about writing as a social act. I learned about writing as a process. I learned about these things, and this is how I learned about it, right? So those are the SLOs you need to address in your portfolio, and we will have gone over these multiple times by the time you guys get there. For right now, you have rhetorical, situation, and genre, right? So analyze, compose, and reflect on arguments in a variety of genres, considering the strategies, claims, and evidence of various mediums and technologies that are appropriate to the rhetorical situation. Right. So that's saying like the rhetorical situation is going to be your topic, right? Your audience, your angle, your context, and your purpose. And if any of those elements change, then the whole thing kind of changes. It becomes a different project, right? So if you're talking to a specific audience, like if you're talking to other college students, then the way that you address that group of people is going to be totally different than if you were talking to sixth graders or if you're talking to like 80-year-olds, right? Like you have to think about how each of the little pieces of the way you address yourself and the way you communicate changes depending on who you're talking to and like what you're trying to do. So writing as a social act is basically describe the social nature of composing, right? Like think about who you're talking to, why you're talking to them, and how the way you talk or the way you write changes depending on who you're talking to, right? So kind of what we were just talking about to some extent. Writing as a process, right? Like there's brainstorming, research, pre-writing, revising, assessing, proofreading. All of those things go into it. It's not a linear process where you just like decide what you're going to write and then you write it, right? There's a lot more to writing. It is a process with multiple steps and stages. Grammar and usage. I think you guys have a pretty good idea what that means. And I'm running out of time. And reflection. So reflection basically is that we ask you to think about your experience in the class and think about what you've been learning, because you actually learn more when you stop and think about it. And this is what the research is showing, is that if we ask students to say like to really like take a moment, take a breather to think about what they've just done, think about their experience with that process, they actually learn more and get more out of it. So we're going to be doing a lot of reflecting. And that is the portfolio assignment. And again, it's not due until the last day of class, and we're going to be working with this off and on throughout. And I want you guys to think as like broadly and creatively about this as you possibly can. So that's it for now. Message me if you have questions or concerns. Also, please watch video B for the rest of all the other stuff that you need to know. All right.